So we'll continue looking at plant materials, or a selection of plant materials. We're going to look at reeds for a bit. Reeds are not trees, of course. They grow in wetlands quite often, and although there's a lot of dry areas in the Middle East, there's also occasional wetland. This is from the marshlands at the in the Tigris-Euphrates basin towards their furthest area of the stream bed in southern Iraq. The marsh people there are well known. Reeds, yeah, I said that. And I've mentioned before the mudif, the houses, the nice houses they live in. Reeds are very flexible building materials. You can see here them making these bundles of reeds to form all sorts of shapes, and here you can see how it's starting to turn into a house over here. And you can even have simpler structures like this, just bundle the reeds together and they can make things. You can cut off the reeds and put down a reed mat and build a house on top of the reeds. And you can build very nice houses on top of the reeds, and you can make entire settlements entirely built on the reeds. There's another nice settlement, and of course you may remember my crazy idea that these things are actually the bases of reeds, or at least conceptually. And we also mentioned previously about the ancient use of reed buildings and reed structures, like these things sticking at the top of this very nice mudif-like building, and other things. And reeds here seem to be creating symbols that are symbolic of something or other. Here it's a bit more obvious, exactly the same things made presumably of reeds, we'll very easily make that of reeds, on top of what looks like some sort of structure, which also looks like it's made of reeds, on the back of a bull, which of course is often a traditional place to place your deity. So maybe this is symbolic of a deity, since there's a priest king here respecting it. That's very likely. And of course the Sumerians use reeds for that other very important activity, drinking beer. Drinking beer out of a pot through a straw. So reeds are found in other places, and also because there are so many reeds in southern Iraq, it'd be a good thing to transport around the regions. These are Kurds, probably in western Iran, who have, here you can see they have in their tents, they have these reed matting. This is a reed matting from Syria, where they've woven fabric into it to make this a wall within the tent. Another thing they made out of reeds, this is like the big reed in the Tigris-Euphrates basin. So they would cut it into strips and make little dents in clay tablets. And this is how they would do cuneiform writing. These little wedges are created by the edges of these split canes, rather like bamboo, from these reeds. And of course there are other reeds. In Egypt, in the Nile, we have a lot of what we know as papyrus. Papyrus is very important. You can see these chaps are making off all these bundles of papyrus. And one of the important things you can make papyrus out of is, of course, papyrus, the paper-like material. So that's what this thing is. Looks like a Book of the Dead or something. And so we first have evidence of papyrus from the 3rd millennium BC, and the latest in the archaeological record seems to be dated to about 1087, although of course they make it to this day. Here you go. So here's the raw dried reed, And so here it's been scraped and sliced into thin strips and soaked and then scraped again to try and get it all squishy. And then it's hit with a hammer and then put through a rolling pin. They really like beat the living daylights out of this stuff. And then they lay these strips, one going one direction, one going the other direction. And then they squish it some more. So here all of that is being put in here and being squished. And out of it you get the paper. And so the fibers of the reeds are now all fused together. And so you can make something strongly resembling what we now call paper out of just reeds of papyrus. This is very nice for the tourists. The ancient stuff seemed to be in more finely made. They might have known how to do things better or just took more time over it. But still you can see that the structure of the reeds in the material, so you can see that this is actually made of papyrus, not made of paper. So papyrus wasn't just an Egyptian thing, it was a massive industry for ancient Egypt. And papyrus was distributed around the Hellenistic and Roman Mediterranean. And there were vast libraries made entirely of papyrus. One of the best preserved is the House of the Papyri at Herculaneum, where they have these large numbers of these scrolls of papyrus, which they're slowly trying to take apart. And so entire libraries would have been made of scrolls. These are actually parchment scrolls made of animal hide, but this would have been what a library was in the ancient world. You would go and find your scroll and you would read it. But we also start to get evidence of other forms of recording. For instance, these Neo-Assyrian chappies who are recording what seems to be a head count here. These are the heads they're counting. And they're recording it in two ways. These styluses may in fact be made of reeds, split reeds, which can be turned into pens for writing. And this chap seems to have a scroll, you see, it's curling here. But this chap has something else, which may possibly look as though it has a hinge here. Here is another one. This time it's the guy on the further side with the scroll, and here is the scribe has this block-shaped thing. Interesting. They seem to be recording weapons and other things that have been acquired. This may be what it is they're holding. This is a scroll, you can see. See scrolls over each end, and you read the bit in the middle. But this is a wax tablet. So the structure is made of wood, and it's filled with blackened beeswax. And so then you write on it. And this is another way of recording things, and you can write on it, and you can send it to people. This is an actual archaeological one. It's from Roman London, where they found a lot of these in the lower parts where it's waterlogged. And this is a stylus. This is a metal one. Looks like it's made of steel with brass bits. And so this wooden thing would be filled with wax, blackened wax, and you would write on it. Sometimes they actually get inscriptions still in the wood, which have been carved right through the wax into the wood underneath. So this sort of, shall we say, book-like thing, and these are also from the UK. This is from Vindolanda, which I've shown you waterlogged things from there before, where this letter is also kind of like a book, where they're sort of sewn together to form a book-like sheath of bits of wood. So this is how a scroll works. This is actually just paper, but you can see it's you scroll from one end to the other, So at some time, somebody took a scroll and bent it like a concertina. And so that made it actually much easier to read if you're not like reading it from one end to the other. So if you wanted to say, I want a passage near the end, then you just flip to the end, which is very difficult to do with a scroll. And so you fold it over, you have writing on both sides of what we shall call a page, and you can bind it and turn it into what we might call a book. So when you actually make an actual book, you take sheets of something or other. This is a very old book. It's from the 7th century and is actually made in England. It's made of vellum or something like that, again, made of animal hide. And you have sheets which are folded over into leaves, which form pages. And so a page will be written on both sides. And then it is bound. And so you have a number of sheets folded into leaves, and a bundle of these leaves you'll sew through together and sew them all together and bind them into a book. And then you'll put a cover on it. These are sometimes called codices or codex is the singular. People tend not to call books nowadays codexes unless they're talking about these handwritten things. But that's basically a book. So the beginnings of books seem to be related to possibly to the spread of Christianity, because the focus of Christianity was this book, including at times the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament written in Greek. This is an example of that. It's made of papyrus, and the text is in Greek. It was found in Egypt. It's the Gospel of John, and it has a recto. That means it's got a front. So the thing about scrolls is they don't have rectos and versos, which is the back. They will just have the front. You just open the scroll and you read the front. I don't know of any example when you would write another thing on the back of a scroll. That just seems wrong. But even if you did write on the back of a scroll, the statistical likelihood that you would have a passage on this page, and then on the overleaf, on the other side of that leaf, you would have the next part of the text, you see. This is verse 18:31 to 33, and this is verse 18:37 to 38. So it's like the next page is on the other side. And so this must be a book, because it's a leaf, 2 pages of a leaf out of a book. So this one is dated about 100 to 150 AD, and there seem to be a number of these around at the time. Some people dated a bit earlier, some people dated a bit later, but around this time we have a number of these parts of the Bible which have been recorded in these books, possibly because it's easy to go from passage to passage, which is eventually becomes a characteristic of how Christians use the Bible, as reading different parts of it at different times, which is different from the Jewish tradition of reading it all in one go over amount of time. And so a scroll works perfectly, as it does to this day. So that brings us to paper. Paper was originally invented in China. It includes plant fiber. It's not like today when you pulverize massive amounts of old growth forests in order to make newspapers. They would use plants like hemp and ramie, which is a East Asian plant, and flax and mulberry, and these all have a lot of cellulose in their fiber, and so you can make paper out of them. Quite often at first they would use clothing, textiles that had been made out of these materials and had been used, and you could break them up more easily, and they were more suitable to making paper. But eventually in China they developed ways of processing the plant fiber so that you could make it into paper directly. And so how they would make it, you can see here they are cooking it all up and crushing it and pulverizing it some more and scooshing around. And here this chap is got a sieve, and he's putting it through the mix of fiber and coming out, and see they're lining up all the frames here, and so the paper dries in the frame. And so when the paper is dry, you take it out of the frame and pile it up here. So I'll mention this now, and I'm going to mention it again. The big advance that they had in the Middle East was they developed a form of sieve made of reeds, made of basketry, which enabled them to pick up the paper, and then they would just slap it out on something. And so you could have the same sieve. You wouldn't like have to set out all of your sieves and wait for them to dry. You would take out some paper and then slap it on a wall or something, and then go get some more, and you would create this mass production. This is something that was developed in the Middle East. And so the earliest reference to this Battle of Talas River is Ta'alabi. The Battle of the Talas River in 751 AD is when the forces of Islam defeated a Chinese army, and apparently the prisoners of war included paper makers. Now, there is actually a lot of evidence for paper use in this part of the world long before this time. Also, later, quite quickly, paper seems to be adopted by the Arab people that are just conquered this area. The earliest paper letter or paper text written in Arabic on paper is dated to the mid-8th century and was found in about this region. Samarkand becomes a very important production center for paper up until quite recent times. Although it must be wondered how was the paper made at first. So eventually what they work out in the Middle East is to make the sieve to pump out a mass production of paper, to make lots and lots of paper. Paper mills were known at Baghdad in the 8th century, and they rapidly spread around the Islamic world. The earliest fragment of paper with Arabic writing in the Middle East is dated to about 796 to 815. So that's from over here. In fact, I should have an arrow for that. Yes. In fact, Harun al-Rashid, the famous Caliph, ordered that writing was to be done only on paper. Now, paper became very, very big for the Islamic world, probably partly because of the importance, again, of their religious literature, because of the Quran. Now, here we have paper and how it's being made in this Middle Eastern process. I believe these chaps are actually from Afghanistan, but here you can see the paper pulp, which they have processed. And here the pulp is in suspension in water, and here's a sieve. And so with this sieve, he's getting out a nice layer of the pulp, and then we'll go and put it somewhere, like slap it against this wall, for instance. And so it's slapped against the wall until it dries, and then they peel it off and pile it up. And so they could make a lot of paper. So why is the Quran relevant? Well, let's look at the Quran for a bit, shall we? And so between about 610 and 632, the Prophet Muhammad, blessings be upon him, receives his revelations. He dies in 632. The revelations were partly continued by oral tradition, not for very long, but for a bit, but also written down on parchment, on stone, on palm leaves, and also the shoulder blades of camels. Shoulder blades of camels and other animals are often used in the ancient world to write things on, as is broken pottery, shards of stone, all sorts of things. It's just to write a quick note and record something. So Abu Bakr, the first Caliph, ordered the collection of all of the material that would go to make the Quran. And about 650, within 20 years of the death of the Prophet, the final authoritative written form was completed and fixed under the direction of Caliph Uthman. So this bit of the Quran here is from the University of Birmingham, where they have this, and they actually have another leaf of this from the same sheet. And they've done radiocarbon analysis on this and dated the parchment to 568 to 645. So that's actually before the final authoritative written version. So that's just actually dating the parchment itself. And it is possible to reuse parchment, but it's probably just very early. And so this and all other early Qurans tend to be on parchment, which was the most common material to make books out of at this time. The oldest paper Quran is dated to about 971, 972. It was made in Iran. But presumably, judging by Harun al-Rashid's emphasis on the importance of writing on paper, they quickly realized that this religion which they were trying to disseminate to as many people as possible, which was based on this text, which they wanted everyone to be able to read and pass around, and became a part of the proselytization of this religion. It would be really good if they had lots and lots and lots of copies of it, and so it's thought that this encouraged the development of paper, of mass-produced paper, and the books were made of the Quran in order to populate the world with Qurans to disseminate the religion. So, next time anyone asks you what religion does for you, you can tell them cheap books, because probably it was the Christians that decided books were a good idea, and it was the Muslims that decided that cheap paper was a good idea. So add to that the printing press, which was also developed to make Bibles as cheaply as possible. You have cheap books, and of course the dissemination of knowledge that comes from the development of having lots of books with lots of cheap paper in it and printed in is what's led to the world we live in today. Thank you.